Welcome to Workmorphous Wired, where we dive deep into the future of work and explore the transformative impact of AI and other emerging tech through conversations with thought leaders, policy experts, and industry innovators. I'm your host, Emily Fabiano. In this episode, we are introducing a new format where we feature and summarize recent studies and trends about AI and the future of work. Joining me today is my colleague, Nick Malacher. Nick is a policy researcher at Workmorphous and the leader of our podcast production. He joined our team in February of 2023 as a policy intern from Carnegie Mellon University, which is renowned for its AI research, among many other things. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Emily. Great to be here today.
Today, we will be summarizing and reacting to a Harvard Business School study called Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier. This study is groundbreaking because it's one of the first to meaningfully quantify the potential for AI to revolutionize knowledge work. The study demonstrated that consultants using ChatGPT significantly outperformed those who did not, highlighting the potential for AI to revolutionize the consulting field. As consultants ourselves, we found this study fascinating. So today we're going to summarize a few key points from the study and discuss a few of the findings that we personally found most interesting. So first, a little bit of background about the study. The researchers conducted a study involving over 750 strategy consultants from Boston Consulting Group, otherwise known as BCG. Through the study, these consultants used AI to help with tasks that mirrored the real-life activities that they would normally do for their clients. The consultants used OpenAI's GPT-4, which was the latest version of AI technology as of spring 2023 when they conducted the study. The goal that the researchers set out with was to investigate the impact of AI on productivity and performance in consulting. The key finding was that AI significantly improved performance on certain consulting tasks, which we'll get into more shortly. Consultants using AI completed an average of 12.2% more tasks and achieved task completion 25.1% more quickly. They also uncovered some really interesting insights into the limitations for integrating AI in the workplace, which we will also discuss in more depth. Couple of key takeaways from our perspective. First, reading through this, one of my key takeaways was that AI can really help level the playing field. Although the study found that all consultants performed better with AI, lower performing consultants experienced a 43% performance boost compared to a 19% boost seen by their higher performing peers. This shows us that although everyone can benefit from successful use of AI in the workplace, lower performing consultants actually stand to benefit the most. One of the other key takeaways was that reliance on AI presents risks. So the concept of the Jagged Technological Frontier suggests that while some tasks can easily be handled by AI, others that may appear similar in difficulty are actually beyond AI's current capabilities. And when consultants used AI for tasks beyond the frontier, their accuracy dropped from 84% to between 60 and 70%. So what does this mean for our listeners? We believe that by finding the right balance between human expertise and AI assistance, organizations can use AI to transform their work processes, potentially resulting in big improvements in productivity and quality. So those were some of my key takeaways. Nick, I'm curious, you read the study as well. What are some of your initial thoughts?
Yeah, Emily, I think, first of all, thank you for that really concise summary of the article. It can be kind of dense to try to dive into some of these academic studies, but like we've discussed, I think it's really important that we explore this. Particularly, I think this study presents a really interesting opportunity and a very appropriate first place for us to explore this format of the podcast, because I think it really delves into a lot of the things that we were hoping to explore with this podcast, which are the potential value of implementing AI. The study demonstrates that there's a really strong boost in performance by utilizing AI in the appropriate settings. However, it also demonstrates some of the risks that can be posed by implementing AI, which I think is another thing that we are really hoping to explore throughout this podcast. And finally, it presents some interesting exploration of the potential ways that people can implement AI. I think we'll get into this later, but the Cyborg versus Centaur debate is kind of an interesting way of looking at how individual consultants in this case can implement AI into their workflow.
Great points. I think there are a lot of good parallels with what we're trying to accomplish through this podcast as well. And it actually builds really nicely upon our previous episode with Reagan Avon about implementation and risks. But I think it's really exciting and particularly insightful for us because a lot of the conversation around the future of work and AI has historically focused on jobs that maybe are manual and can be automated or repetitive cognitive tasks. Whereas this study kind of shows the next frontier, which is those unstructured creative tasks. And it starts to show us the potential for AI in helping to be the rising tide that lifts all boats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago when we talked about automation or artificial intelligence replacing tasks or replacing workers, it was more thought about in the context of blue collar workers or manual labor type jobs. But I think the emergence of large language models and generative AI have definitely created a new situation. And I think it's interesting the study mentions this where tasks that were traditionally assigned to high paid, high knowledge workers can also now be replaced by AI, at the very least augmented by artificial intelligence. So I think we've definitely gotten to a new frontier, but there seems to be kind of a transition into knowledge work too, now being possibly replaced or augmented by artificial intelligence. And so that kind of gets to one of the things that I found interesting that you drew out of this, which is the potential implications of AI on the skills gap.
Yeah, I think, obviously this is still evolving. It's uncertain, so I don't have any definitive answers here. But I think the potential is really exciting because of the impact of AI to help level a playing field. I wasn't surprised that AI enhanced performance of consultants. I was just surprised in the big difference in how it enhanced performance between lower and higher performing consultants. And I thought that was an interesting distinction that was made in the study as well. So I do think that based on the results of the study, it's really exciting that AI can help enhance the abilities of anybody in the workforce. Well, anybody in the consulting workforce, I should say, including those who are lower performing. I do think that there's potential to help bridge the skills gap, but I think there's still a level of proficiency that is required at baseline in order for that AI to really support the growth. So it's an interesting finding and one that I think I'll be curious to learn more about and see as more studies happen and as we see more coming out of the consulting field.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that I'm sure if we were to talk with any of the researchers from this study, they would want us to mention, which is validity. In a study where they're researching consultants, and those are the subjects of the study, on particularly consulting tasks, the external validity of the study, meaning what the results can be applied to outside of the consulting world, remains in question. So it will be interesting to see how this almost certainly will motivate other studies in other knowledge work fields and beyond. So it'll be interesting to see how scholarship on the implications of artificial intelligence expands in the months and years to come.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of really exciting potential here and certainly some great implications for skills enhancement. I think there are also two really important points that I think all leaders should consider. First point is that effective training and education are essential. And the second point is that AI is a tool and not a crutch. And these are things that really came out of the study. On the first point, employees must first be empowered with a basic understanding of AI and how it can support them in their work. Without that basic level of understanding, implementation is unlikely to be successful because they need to be bought in and they need to see how it can work for them. Then leaders can consider providing some training to help employees use AI more effectively. And that's another thing that can help them take it to the next level. So, some of the consultants in the study actually received a prompt engineering overview. Prompt engineering, for our listeners, being kind of the science behind the inputs that you put into like a chat GPT when you ask questions so that you get successful answers to your questions. So, when the consultants received that prompt engineering overview, they performed better on average than those who did not receive the overview. So, there are kind of layers. There's the baseline fundamental understanding, and then there's education and training beyond that that will allow people to be successful. The second point I wanted to make here is that AI is a tool and not a crutch. AI does make mistakes, as is noted in the study, especially for tasks that are beyond the frontier. When consultants used AI for tasks beyond the frontier, their accuracy dropped from 84% to between 60 and 70%. So it's crucial that employees become proficient in their work first. And that was my point about, making sure that we have that baseline level of understanding in our tasks first, and then become proficient enough in AI to understand its pitfalls and where it could go wrong so that they can check their work.
Yeah, I thought the findings about the importance of education was very interesting, particularly because one of the things that the authors of the study noted was that those who had this AI education or this overview of the mechanism of ChatGPT was that the amount of the generative AI production or what the AI was producing, the amount that the participants were retaining in their work was much higher. And so this gets into our conversations with Reagan and the discussion more generally about trust. It might be that after having this education, the participants felt more comfortable with the AI output. And so it led to higher retention of the AI's production, which has important implications both for the individual use, but also the conversation that we're going to have a little bit later about creativity and how AI could potentially lead to a narrowing of thought in certain ways.
Absolutely. I think that's a great observation.
And so another thing that you brought up that I thought was really interesting was this dynamic that the authors drew out in terms of how different consultants were choosing to incorporate AI in their workflow. And they come up with this interesting dichotomy that they dub cyborgs and centaurs. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, first, just to kind of explain those terms to our listeners. So, the study, as Nick mentioned, showed that employees used AI in two distinctive ways. And I should mention specifically consultants who successfully used AI. So these are successful ways that they interacted with the technology. Those who successfully used it adopted either a Centaur or a Cyborg approach. And as defined by the study, centaurs are people who really divided and delegated their work between themselves and the AI. So, like the mythical creature, the centaur, half human, half horse, it's really about dividing up those responsibilities. The cyborgs more seamlessly integrated their task flow with AI, continuously interacting with it as they worked. So these are two distinct styles. I thought it was interesting that the study did not note any significant differences in performance between those who took the Centaur or the Cyborg approach, only that both approaches were successful.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what further research comes out of this study because I think the authors noted that they're continuing to analyze both the performance of participants, but also the chat logs that they were conducting with ChatGPT. So it'll be interesting to see if any sort of insights can come from that. But I think it definitely poses an interesting question. I think personally, and I'll be interested to hear from you what approach appeals to you more. At first read of the study, I felt a little bit more preferential towards the Centaur approach, but I do wonder if that doesn't come from like a little bit of an internal bias towards this idea of my work being from me. And if I don't feel almost like a little threatened by the cyborg approach, because I don't know, it seems that incorporating AI into every step of your work might almost remove a little bit of that personal flavor from it. But then the flip side is that the cyborg approach proved to be really successful and in some ways even more successful, it seemed, than the centaur approach. So, like you mentioned, both proved successful in the end. And so there's no particular way that the study like recommended approaching work like this. But I think it does pose some interesting questions as we consider how we as individuals implement AI into our workflows.
Absolutely. To your point, the stylistic differences in the way that people work and how they can both be successful. I personally have used both approaches. I didn't know what they were as I was using them, but as I've experimented, I've definitely used it in both ways. Perhaps the cyborg approach can be successful because you're in a way maybe communicating more with the AI and providing more specific instructions along the way. So that could be one way that it could make that approach successful. But I think my main observation with this is that in either case, the approach was effective. And in both cases, I think AI works best when it's used alongside of humans, like a co pilot or an assistant, depending on how you look at it. And to the key takeaway there, from my perspective, is as leaders and implementers, we can utilize AI as a tool to improve performance across our teams. But of course, it's important not to rely too much on it because it can be difficult to know when AI is making a mistake.
Absolutely. And as a leader yourself, would you like to offer a little insight into how you specifically implement AI in your workflow?
Sure. So I use AI often, as does our team. And usually, when I use AI, it's to augment or improve upon my own thought processes. So, AI is really good at ideation. And that's one of the things that came out of this study. I haven't used it as much for that. I've used it more to kind of test and challenge my ideas. Maybe because of what you said, Nick, right? Like it's ideas coming from you. You want to keep that originality. I use AI to kind of test my ideas out. So, a couple of use cases for me personally. The first would be if I want specific insights for a particular domain. So, for example, if I'm thinking about investing in a new type of retirement account for employees at the company, I could ask GPT-4 to act like a CPA. This is one of the prompt engineering hacks that I like to use often is giving it a persona. So I'll say, act like a CPA and give me a list of questions to ask my tax advisor about the advantages and the disadvantages of a new plan. And this way, you get the insights that GPT has from all of the knowledge, all of the information it's been trained on. But then I can still apply it and ask my tax advisor. Of course, I wouldn't take any advice from ChatGPT when making a decision like that, but it can expand my horizons to ask questions that I may not have thought of because I am not a CPA. Another example would be if I have a complicated process and I want to put that in easy to follow steps. So I could ask AI to summarize a lengthy document into a series of simple steps. Or sometimes I test out my ideas by asking ChatGPT to act as my audience and providing feedback or critical questions to help me improve my case.
That's great. And I think it's demonstrative of the fact that there's a lot of ways that AI can be implemented in big and small ways into our daily workflows. And I think we've discussed this. A really great way to find the best way to implement AI into your daily life is to just go ahead and try it out and see what sticks, see what works, and then continue with that. And then conversely, find out what doesn't work and eliminate that. We want to encourage listeners to be cautiously explorative with AI, to be cautious in the sense that we need to acknowledge that there is very real applications that AI is not only not good at, but could have negative consequences. But the flip side is there is a lot of pretty reasonable and relatively low stakes opportunities to implement AI into our daily workflow.
Yes, absolutely. Even though I use AI a lot and we use AI a lot as a team experimentally, I think there's so much more opportunity that we don't even know about yet to be using AI in a wiser manner. And maybe we'll get some feedback from our listeners on how they use AI that will give us some inspiration. I also wanted to mention for our listeners as a company, we use AI powered tools as well. So, not just interacting with like a chat GPT itself, but also tools that have an API that brings in those capabilities. So, Notion, for example, is the internal hub that we use for all of our brainstorming and our content development. And Notion's new AI features have helped us iterate on names of new initiatives and help us outline content, refine our writing, and so much more. We also use tools like Gamma, which is a content creation tool. It helps us generate slide decks and presentations. And you can actually auto generate a design, copy, so, text for your slides and images based on a simple objective. You put in an objective for what you want your presentation to accomplish, or you can provide plain text content. So these tools have saved us dozens of hours, and I feel like we have a long way to go even in implementing AI, but the possibilities are really exciting.
Great. So I think one final place that would be a good thing for us to discuss as we begin to wrap up today is the namesake of the study, the Jagged Technological Frontier. It's a little bit esoteric, but I think it's an important thing for us to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. The Jagged Technological Frontier is the name that the researchers have given to basically the concept that knowledge work has boundaries in terms of what AI can and can't do. So, within the Jagged Technological Frontier, those would be tasks that are within AI's current capabilities. And within its current capabilities, AI can assist and improve human work, which results in some of these big improvements that we see in the study. However, when a task falls outside of the frontier, AI output is usually less accurate and not as helpful. So, one of the big challenges associated with the study is it's not always clear what's in the frontier and what's outside of the frontier. So, that is a big challenge that leaders in professional services like consulting and in other industries are going to need to become more familiar with moving forward. So, my key takeaway here is AI is a fantastic tool that we should all be thinking about using, but we can't overly depend on it. And I think that will continue even as AI gets better. So, the Jagged Technological Frontier emphasizes the need to understand those limitations and drawbacks so that we can avoid problems that come from using AI and not knowing its limitations. Also, employees can't solely depend on AI's outputs. And this gets back to one of the points that we talked about earlier, which is that we have to have a great enough level of competency to be able to identify when AI produces an output that isn't aligned or that isn't correct and course correct. One of the quotes from the study that I found interesting is, an immediate danger arising from these findings is that people may cease delegating work within the frontier to junior workers, creating longer term training gaps. This is a huge implication, and we need to be careful not to miss the opportunity or get lazy in bringing up the next generations of talent as we start to automate some of the things or augment some of the things that we work on.
I think those are all really great points. The idea of the frontier here is interesting, and I think AI inherently poses a lot of challenges in navigating that. From what we talked about, how it's constantly changing, so that in and of itself is changing what AI can and can't do. But also, I think the study interestingly pointed out that AI, and particularly generative AI, is unique compared to other technologies that we often interface with on a day to day basis, in that it's surprisingly good at certain things that we may not expect it to be good at, but then it's also surprisingly bad at some things that we traditionally associate computers or machines being good at, one of which being like simple calculations. It's one of the things that AI actually struggles with that we would assume a computer could do very easily. And so there's a lot of difficulty, hence the name, the Jagged Technological Frontier. It's often changing, and understanding where those in and outs lie is definitely something that will continue to be a problem, and something that implementers of AI need to be aware of.
Absolutely. And that raises a good point as well. It is counterintuitive that AI isn't good at calculations. And we've seen some instances in research and in studies as well where AI will actually hallucinate or make up the source of information, or it may make up information because it's really just predicting what word comes next. So again, that raises the importance not only of having the subject matter expertise for whatever you're using AI to help with, but also knowing how to effectively use AI. That expertise can be developed through formal education, on the job training, and upskilling, but we're really going to need to rethink how we approach our education and training models to ensure that effective use of AI is included in those, and that, of course, people have the baseline level of understanding they need to be successful in those training programs. So we have a lot of work to do in the education and training space to prepare for this frontier.
Absolutely. And one final thing that I thought was a little bit contradictory was the study's findings on AI's impact on creativity. What did you think about that?
I thought that was fascinating too, and I'm really glad that you brought this up because I think one of the themes as technology continues to advance is the need for human creativity. And there's a lot of fear right now that AI is going to take over the most creative tasks. I think that's one of the biggest fears that we're seeing kind of play out in the news cycle and in conversations. But although the progress that AI has made is really impressive, I think human creativity becomes even more important as AI advances. And this came through in the study in a way, or at least the way that I interpreted it. Researchers found that people using AI came up with better ideas, but those ideas were less varied than those without AI. So it can be limiting, it can hinder our creativity or the diversity of thought and ideas that comes out of these brainstorming exercises. So, as companies integrate AI into their operations, they should consider ways to mitigate the risk of homogenous output that could happen as a result of use of AI, because this can hinder creativity and innovation. So, to me, that says the best solution currently is human creativity. And as these models continue to get better, as they sharpen and hone their abilities, we'll probably see more homogenous outputs. So we need to continue to think about how we can embed human creativity in every step of the process.
Absolutely. And I think that's an interesting distinction there that you made between creativity and thought diversity, and like the differentiation of thought amongst different people. I guess they're not the same thing necessarily, but to a certain extent, they do go hand in hand. And so, what was interesting about the study's finding is that the people who were reviewing these consultants' output rated the AI's production very highly in creativity. They found them to be very creative. However, many people were producing very similar outputs across the board. And so, in a sense, things that were ostensibly creative were no longer as innovative or diverse in their thought because of the fact that everyone was working from the same model's idea of what was creative in this context. So it almost suggests that as AI continues to be implemented and becomes increasingly used by a broader swath of the population, that human creativity and individual thought could become increasingly valuable.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I love your optimism and thoughtfulness and the way that you think about AI.
This has been a great discussion, Emily, and I think we're getting to the end here. So I'd love if you could wrap things up and let them know what you think the highlights or key takeaways should be from this conversation.
Couple of key points from our discussion today. The first is that AI can improve performance, but it cannot substitute education and training. Key takeaway for those leaders in education, workforce, and in industry who are thinking about how they can take a leading role in this next frontier. The second is that there are multiple effective ways to use AI, and organizations must balance innovation with risk management as they implement. We received some really strong insights from Reagan Avon in a previous episode on this. So if you haven't listened to that episode, please check it out. And last but not least, we should not overly depend on AI, and human creativity will likely become even more important as AI advances. So, as always, we have an optimistic view of what AI can do, not only for the workforce in general, but also for our industry. And I'm curious to know from our listeners what some of your key takeaways are. Is there more that you'd like to know from us? If you're listening on Spotify, you can let us know by engaging with the Q&A features in the episode description. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or other platforms, feel free to email us at info@workmorphus.com to contribute to future episodes. Thank you for listening. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Workmorphus Wired. If you enjoyed the conversation, please let us know by leaving a rating and review. To make sure you don't miss any future episodes, be sure to subscribe. Finally, if you found value in today's discussion, we hope you'll pass the podcast along to a friend or colleague. As always, thanks for tuning out the noise and tuning in to Workmorphus Wired.